Now, major hormones of the duodenum, there's a lot to go over here. So for this class, I kind of we are covered gastrin when we talked about the stomach, but I think ones I think you should know, definitely know. Secretin, what do I want you to know? Well, one of the major effects it has is that it increases bile production. And this, so what, and then it also increases pancreatic buffers. So this is one of the enzymes that, or not enzymes, but hormones that it makes sense because when you're just done digesting something, hey, maybe we want bile and we want pancreatic juices there to help digest what we just made. So when you're done with digestion in the stomach, it makes sense to elevate levels of secretin. And then cholecystokinin, this is interesting. And so or CCK? So CCK is secreted in response to fatty it says proteinaceous. So if you have a meat, like say you have something like prime rib, where it's like has a lot of protein but also a lot of fat as well, well, you're going to produce a lot of CCK, and that's going to increase your pancreatic enzymes because again, you have all that protein and you have all that fat. So maybe we want more lipases and proteases. It's also going to increase your gallbladder contraction. Why? Because if you have a very fatty meal, you want more bile to help break up those fats as well. And also going to increase the contraction of that hepatopancreatic sphincter. So every time that sphincter kind of contracts, it does a little squirt of that mixture of bile and pancreatic juices. So if you have a very fatty and protein-rich meal, it makes sense that you want to increase the production of all these enzymes from the liver and pancreas and chemicals that help with chemical digestion of fats and proteins. Okay, so then that was the duodenum, and then back to our small intestines in general. We did cover a bit of the anatomy, but let's talk more about, okay, so, oh yeah, my little analogy. This is my little drawing. I know I kind of mentioned it in the previous one. So again, you have villi that reach out and form these little, increase the surface area of your small intestines, but you also have microvilli. So I like to think of microvilli as little fingers. And if you didn't have microvilli, you would have your villi, but they have less surface area. They have less ability to grab on and absorb nutrients you digest. So that's how I can think of it. Like villi, they're like arms. Microvilli are like fingers projecting from little arms. But the thing is that when you look at it, you don't look at the very microscopic level. These microvilli, there's so many of them that they kind of look like a solid border, and this is what we call our brush border. And then each of these villi, they also have blood vessels. And not only do they have blood vessels, they also have lymphatic vessels as well. So we have capillaries, but not just blood capillaries. We also have lymphatic capillaries. Now, what we have here are enzymes in the small intestine. So you have things like proteases, and for example, erepsin. I'm not going to ask you to memorize like specific, unless I explicitly mention it, I'm not going to ask you to memorize all the small intestine enzymes, but for carbohydrates that digest carbohydrates, I think you should know these three. So we have maltase, which takes, remember like, oh, or actually I don't think we covered this yet, but preview of metabolism. So glucose and glucose, these are monosaccharides. When you join them together, they make maltose. But maltase is going to take those two maltose molecule and metabolize it, catabolize it, and separate it back into two glucose molecules. Then you have lactase, and hey, lactate. If you're lactose intolerant, you probably you produce very little, or you don't produce lactase at all. So what lactase is a combination of two monosaccharides. Lactose is a combination of two monosaccharides. Glucose is one of those monosaccharides, but galactose is the other monosaccharide. And then what lactase does is take lactose and breaks it into glucose and galactose. So a common thing that trips people up, some people think that galactose is the disaccharide, the bigger molecule, because it's a longer word. It's actually a simpler molecule. So galactose plus glucose is lactose. Lactose is bigger than galactose. And then sucrase, so maltose, lactose, what do we think that sucrase helps to digest? Well, it's going to help digest sucrose, and sucrose is made from two monosaccharides. So fructose plus glucose is sucrose, and sucrose is our table sugar, and you also find a lot of sucrose in fruit as well, and also anywhere pretty much plants that have sugar. And then sucrase is going to digest and catabolize sucrose into fructose plus glucose. All right, so then let's go back to those vessels. Now we're pretty much like we're pretty much done chemically digesting all these different, what you just ate, into biological macromolecule types. So now we want to absorb it into our intestines and our bloodstream. So capillaries, well, these are from submucosal arteries and veins. So you can see here represented in this cartoon by red and blue vessels. So what are they going to do? They're going to absorb sugar and proteins. And why those two? Well, sugars easily dissolve in water. They're very hydrophilic. Same with proteins in general. Proteins are, on a whole, hydrophilic. So they'll have an easier time like digesting, and amino acids are most amino acids are hydrophilic, but there are some hydrophobic ones. But rewind that. I'll retract that. So most proteins overall are hydrophilic. So what happens is it goes to the bloodstream, and because they're hydrophilic, sugars and proteins in general, they have an easy time being absorbed and deposited into your water-based plasma. Now lacteals, they're very interesting because they're from lymphatic vessels. So they're a special type of lymphatic vessel, and what they do is absorb fats. And why is that? Well, remember what happens if your blood vessels get too much fat in it? You might develop atherosclerosis, and you have these very tiny capillaries in your villi. So what happens if you start dumping a bunch of fat into your capillaries? It might end up like what if you try to dump a bunch of fat into your plumbing system or your drain without, just try to dump into the sewer. It's going to clog up your pipes, right? So these lacteals, they absorb fats, and they're a special type of transport method that separates it from your blood vessels. So it goes to your lymph, and it forms something called chyle. And this is so lymph from the small intestines, it contains fat droplets. So again, if you get a lymphatic blockage, it's not as devastating as if you would get, or if you get a blockage here, it's not as devastating as if you block your capillaries in your intestines. So yeah, that's one of the things. It kind of divides the two. Like, is it hydrophilic or hydrophobic? As if it's hydrophilic, it goes into the capillaries because again, you have all that water-based blood. And if it's fatty, it goes into the lacteals.